Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today for the Exit Plan Forum. This is presented by an organization called Getting Your Affairs in Order. And what is Getting Your Affairs in Order? Well, it's an organization that helps you create a legacy, create the legacy that you want to be left. You know, it's one thing for you to know how you want your affairs to be handled and how you want to be remembered, but it's another thing for all of that to be executed. So today we have a panel of experts. Can I say that panel? Can I say experts? That have gathered to help answer some of the questions that you might have about how to do this. So let me share with you who's on the panel today and a little bit about each of them. We have Manel Williams, who is a licensed funeral director, Class 1, who completed her studies at Humber College. She has over 20 years of experience serving in the funeral industry and is currently the pre-planning funeral director at the New Haven Funeral Center. Focusing on pre-planning allows her to engage the community through presentations and personal meetings. She brings her warm and approachable personality to these important conversations, knowing how beneficial they will be for the family in the future. I'd like also for you to meet Angela. Angela Yi Hamshaw is a wills and estate lawyer who has been practicing law since 1999. Angela worked in the wealth management division of two major financial institutions, the Government of Alberta in the Office of the Public Trustee, and her own firm, which focused primarily on wills and estate practice, before bringing her experience to Massouk Law in 2018. Having served the range of both high net worth clients and in-need Albertans, Angela's detailed and thorough approach to planning for clients from all walks of life and compassion in dealing with estates when dealing with a loss is evident in her successful practice in the last 2 decades. Angela is very personable, and her ability to relay complex legal concepts to clients is the hallmark of her long career. I'd like also for you to meet Ran McGee. Ran is a licensed cemetery director who focuses on cemetery and interment services. Ran guides families through the process of using their insurance and probate fee funding when needed the most. Families enjoy working with Ran because of his friendly, professional, and individualized approach to preserving their heritage and tradition. Next, meet Glenn Griffiths. Glenn is an insurance consultant with over 20 years of vast experience. He is independent, which allows him to draw from multiple sources to provide you customized solutions. He's been there to help his clients with the fun events in life and also the tragic realities of life. Glenn believes that having a plan in place will also allow those you love the ability and finances to fulfill your dreams and wishes, which equals to peace of mind. He says proper planning can transition a tragedy into a stepping stone to triumph. Next, meet panelist Mr. Michael Pearson. Michael is the president of Pearson's Funeral Services in Calgary, Alberta. This family-run funeral home has been serving families in Calgary and surrounding area for over 30 years. Michael has a passion for his work and loves helping families who need their services. He's also very proud of the business that his family has built and the good reputation that Pearson's Funeral Services has acquired over the last several years. So those are our panelists, and I'd like to introduce you now to our hosts. We have two lovely hosts. The first one of which is Rhonda Green. So Rhonda began working at her church, the First Baptist Church of Glenarden in Maryland, in 1997. Within a few years, she became the funeral coordinator, providing funeral and memorial services full-time to members and families in the community. Today, Rhonda serves as the funeral services manager at First Baptist. She educates members and the community on how to get their house in order in preparation for their final days. Together with her team, she continues to provide services that are of the highest quality and most detailed protocol. And how did Rhonda get into this? Well, Rhonda Green's passion to console grieving hearts began when she was actually a young child. At funerals with her mom, she passed out programs and tissues to comfort bereaved family members. When she was 12, her grandmother became very ill. Rhonda knew in her heart that her grandmother was dying and felt a compelling need to be with her. During that moment, Rhonda played a pivotal role as she held her dear grandmother's hand while she slipped away into eternity. That was the beginning of her life passion to help people and families transition. Rhonda says, take care of the business of dying now, then you can focus on living. Rhonda is also the author and founder of My Exit Plan. It was birthed in 2018 and published in 2019. From coast to coast and beyond the continental United States, Rhonda shares My Exit Plan and her wealth of information to educate people and spare them the stress of making emotionally charged decisions. Her partnership with a host of end-of-life planners includes funeral directors, attorneys, insurance providers, and cemeteries. They provide timely information that enables her audiences to plan for the future of their loved ones beyond death. At each seminar, interview, and symposium, Rhonda's focus on death and transition helps people live well and be fully present in life and death. Her wish is that people embrace the information presented to plan for tomorrow and beyond. Rhonda is married to Ronald Green and is the mother of 3, grandmother of 7, and owner of 1 dog. I have that dog's name as BB. And last but certainly not least, my colleague, Andrea Cox. Andrea was born and raised in Calgary, Canada, and is a licensed pre-planning consultant in both Alberta and in BC. Andrea takes pride in sharing valuable information with families, and since 2015, she has helped many persons understand the importance of getting their affairs in order before a crisis happens. She does this through webinars, podcasts, and enjoys partnering with various professionals who share similar values. Andrea says this: if you do not see her struggling with IT stuff on her Facebook Lives, Instagram, posting on her and our social media handles, running seminars, partnering with other professionals on Clubhouse, who she called her husband and had to do a part-time separation because she was spending too much time on it, then she is focusing on writing her upcoming book, which has a step-by-step guide on preparing for your final departure, along with checklists and a workbook. Interestingly enough, Monday is Andrea's 4th anniversary conducting seminars with our company, Getting Your Affairs in Order. She got her first shot, I remember this, Andrea, she got her first shot at leading seminars after one of our colleagues who was scheduled to fly out from BC into Alberta canceled that morning because he got sick. And Andrea had to figure that out pretty darn quickly. I'll let her tell you what she did to her hand, because that's a story. This trooper has also managed to be the 2nd person in Alberta to hold a double license with Alberta Insurance Council and the Alberta Funeral Board when she became licensed back in 2018 with the Alberta Funeral Board. Andrea's goal is to ensure that more families feel comfortable talking about death and eventually have a plan in place so that their families are not left with avoidable crisis during a devastating time. Having a plan in place will take away the stress, chaos, confusion, possibly, most definitely, I believe, family disputes and financial burdens on loved ones, and instead leave them to be able to just grieve. Remember, taking care of this now means you can focus on living the best life, because tomorrow is not focused or is not promised. So that's a lot of information. The hosts would also like you to know that the combination of number of years of expertise, I hope everybody's sitting down, between all of these experts is over 157 years. So there you go. If you cannot get your answers today, people, you won't get your answers, I'm telling you. So at this point, you've heard enough of me. I'm going to hand it over to one of our lovely hosts, Ms. Rhonda Green.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. I want to start off with an impact story by Pravana? If I'm pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me. But we're going to jump right into an impact story by her. So I want you to just sit back and receive her awesome story.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank you for having me here. I am honored to share my experience. The reason that I like to share my story is that I do not want someone else to go through what I went through. My name is Parvane Vijdani, and I'm owner of the Gypsy Rose Florist in Southwest Calgary, but we deliver all over Calgary and internationally. I'm a kind of florist that has compassion for all my customers, especially the one that has lost their loved one, and they come here for my services. I feel their pain. Trust me, I really do. So when I am in the other side of the counter as a customer, I like to be treated with the same compassion. Here is my experience with one of the funeral homes here in Calgary. When my brother passed away suddenly, I was put in a position to take care of his funeral. Just for you to know, my brother didn't have wife, kids, or money. This was my first experience arranging a funeral. So as you can see, I had no experience. My emotions were high, and you have to take care of everything in a short time. Unfortunately, this funeral home looked at me as a business transaction. Because of them, I was hurt financially while going through a grievance. I felt that they took an advantage of me because I was emotionally sad and could not think straight. First thing they did was they tried to upsell me with the product and services, even they knew I am paying for everything. The second thing they did, which was the worst that hurt me to today, is this. The director of funeral home did not inform me of how the government subsidy works and what their policies are. I was told that you pay for it first and we will submit the application to government, and it will take 2 to 4 days for them to approve or deny it. So I paid everything with my visa to that funeral home. Later on, director phoned me and informed me that my application for subsidy was denied. She didn't know why they denied it. So they left me to deal with that government department. I phoned that department several times, and I found out why it was denied. The government subsidy department has a very clear and firm policy about this funding, and here it is. This is very important. You are automatically unqualified as soon as anybody, pay the funeral home expenses. Funeral home knew about the policy and did not share it with me. When I confront them, their answer was, this is a new policy and we did not know about it. That was a pure lie according to the government agent. The policy have been there for years and all the funeral home knows about it. They just did not share that information with me. In my opinion, the funeral home lied to me by mission. So funeral home got their money right away from me, and the rest was on my plate to deal with the government. After that, still funeral home tried to keep a part of my money for the service that were not given to us. So I phoned them and told them about my bad experience, and hopefully they will treat their next customers better. I also told them not to take the advantage of their customers because they are sad and very vulnerable. Because of the funeral home lack of compassion and sharing correct information with me, I end up paying for everything. In my opinion, money comes and money goes, but an experience always stays with you. Thank you for your time, and hopefully we all show more compassion when dealing with people's emotion during this sad time. Parvane Vijdani. Thank you for your time.
Wow, that brings tears to my eyes to know that you experienced that. And this is why it's so important that we're doing what we're doing today, and that's helping people get their affairs in order prior to illness, prior to death. So, Pravana, can you just give us a little nugget, a takeaway? What would you say to the people here today? Just one giveaway, what, based on your experience, what they should really know.
Well, I'm gonna go read it very fast in a short form, what I learned from this. It took me 1.5 years to deal with this. I even end up hiring a lawyer. So what I can share is do your homework before you pass away. Ask lots of questions about everything. Go to funeral home with your support system so they can advocate for you. Have a will. That is very important. So it would be easier on your family to take care of it and pre-plan your funeral. Save money for your funeral. Funerals are not cheap. And interview 3 funeral homes before choosing one.
Good. I love that. That's great. Thank you so much. Now we're going to jump right into our questions. I want to start off with Angela, our attorney. Angela, can you share with us exactly what a will is, and then also why we need to have one?
Okay, well, before I start, I should mention that the laws are different in each province of Canada, and each province governs the area of wills and estates. And if you happen to be in the United States as well, you're going to have to look to your individual state laws as well. So not estate laws, but state laws about estates. So my perspective is coming from Alberta law. And so why do you need a will? Why is it important to have a will? Because in an area where there's a lot that's out of your control, having a will allows you to have some level of control. So what is a will? That is your question. And so a will is a document. And so it's not videotaped. It's a written document in which you appoint an executor. You distribute your estate. So these are the things that you earned during your lifetime and your assets and things of value to you. And that you pass it on to loved ones or charities or friends. It allows you to name a guardian. It allows you to name an executor, and we can dive into those a little bit more. But it's a document that is signed by you in the presence generally of 2 witnesses. And there's certain stipulations over which witnesses, what people can act as witnesses. But yes, it is a document that allows you to do all those different things.
Okay, and can you just tell us a little more about why it's so important to have one? You know, what happens when you don't have one? Give us some of the goodies.
Sure. Well, okay, so first of all, you don't have a will, you don't have a say. There's absolutely no control. And so if you want your provincial or state laws to distribute your estate on your behalf, that's what will happen. So if it ends up with people you don't intend it to end up, then that's because you don't have a will. And so why is it important? Well, it's important so that you can name someone that you trust to take care of these things when you're no longer here. It allows you to pick someone to raise your kids if you've got minor kids. It allows you to save taxes. So there may be ways that you can plan so that the government doesn't end up with more of your hard-earned money and your loved ones end up with more of that money. You get to distribute the funds to the people that you love and care about. Perhaps your kids are fully grown and they don't need the money, but you think maybe you'd like to donate it to your local charity. You know, perhaps you've got a good friend that's been part of your life for so long. Well, the government doesn't necessarily recognize friends and charities as part of that distribution. So that's why it's so important, is that you're going to have that say.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much. You know, so many people don't have wills. And if we don't help them to understand why it's important, guess what? They'll probably never get one. So this is perfect. I want to switch over to our funeral director, Manel. Manel, can you tell us how do you determine which family member is authorized to make the arrangements? You know, sometimes there's a spouse, sometimes there is a significant other, and then sometimes there are adult children. And everybody thinks they have the right to make the decisions. But tell us who legally has the right to make the decision.
Yes, so I am in Toronto, Ontario, so I'm following our laws here. And if you have a will, we're going to the executor. Whoever's listed, that's who we speak to. If you don't, then we follow a list. So it is important if you are married, even if you're separated, if you are still married, that is the person that we will be speaking to next. And we go from there and follow a list all the way down through any family members. So spouse first, then children, then there's grandparents, and it kind of goes down from there. And you can always divert. If you don't want to be that person, you can divert it to someone else. Basically, who will pay for it can be the one making the decisions. Thank you.
Wow, good answer, good answer. We're going to jump into insurance with Glenn. Glenn, can you tell us what the difference is between term and perm insurance? Because we know that there's so many people that have life insurance and they've bought these policies, and at the end of the day, when they pass away, there's no value. So help us to understand that, Glenn.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thank you, Rhonda. So term insurance is basically like it sounds. You buy this insurance for a term, whether that's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever the case may be. It may not end depending on how young you are at that age, but it jumps up at a very distinguishable increase, so put it that way. But they inevitably, most term has an end date somewhere around age 85. Okay, so even if you wanted to pay the premiums that have gone up, you cannot hold on to it past a certain age in most cases. Now, permanent insurance is a little bit different. And I compare the two to like renting and buying. You could rent my house for 30 years, love you, you've been a great tenant, but you don't own anything, right? Well, permanent insurance is insurance you own, and it's basically designed to outlive you by one day, call it that, right? So it will be there when you are no longer there to pay out to who you've put as your beneficiaries. And that really is the key. So initially the cost is a bit higher, but over your lifetime, it turns out to be way more economical than term. The problem is we just don't know when we're gonna die. So we're gonna cover a basis sometimes a term in the early days, or a combination of both, depending on your situation. But you need to have permanent because you want something to pay you back and take care of your family when you no longer can afford to pay this or want to pay this. You just want it there and sitting, waiting for you, just like your will.
Wow, did everybody get that? That's a real piece of education that we all need to have, because so many of us make that mistake and we get all this term insurance and then we get old, we die, and there's no insurance. So make sure you got that piece. I'm going to jump over to Rand. Now, here's a question that was sent in to us, and I'd like to hear the answer to this myself. It's a cemetery-related question, and it says, I know my parents paid for a cemetery plot, but I cannot find the paperwork. How do I find their plots? Rand, that question is for you.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. So if you have purchased a cemetery plot and you cannot find that cemetery plot, you would look into the area that you suspect that they have purchased the cemetery property. You would go into that cemetery and ask for a cemetery director or a manager, and they would do a search on that name, find that information, and they would provide that to the. You would also have to identify yourself the reasonable information. A lot of times the information is semi-private and they wouldn't give it to just anyone. But if you told them that you're a family relative or you had a close interest or you were looking for a loved one, they would provide that information by giving you a map of the cemetery and a location marker that would have that geographic location of where that spot is for you to find that area.
Okay, Rand, so what if they don't know what cemetery it is? Is there a database that they can go to get that information or to find out the cemetery?
Yeah, so there is a database that you can search to find archives.ca in Canada, archives.com in the US. Also, you can search records for government records to see when someone has deceased, even asking family members when that person had passed and what state, province, or country, if you're talking about Europe or even the Caribbean or anywhere else in the world. And then you would search the government records through the death records and then continue that search to the province or city to get more detailed information on that. So yes, you can. And cemetery professional can help you do that. Also, Google is a great avenue to search up records for when that funeral was presented, and that information can be online also.
Great answer. Now, one other question, Rand. The writer says, if I'm buying a plot, do I have to decide if I want it to be double depth before I purchase it? So, it may be someone that starts out single and then they're deciding, oh, maybe I'm going to get married or have a kid, whatever the case. They want to know, do they have to tell you up front that they want it to be double depth?
Correct. So buying chattel is similar to buying a house. If you decided to buy an entry-level house and it was a two-bedroom home, you would let your real estate agent, your cemetery director, know what it is you're purchasing, have a discussion, build a relationship with that person to say, well, hey, I come from a large family. I, in the future, wish to get married and have 12 kids, and so on and so forth. Then they would give you information on buying a plot or an area where you can have family heritage. They would also ask your family history. So yes, you would let them know that you'd like a single depth, double depth. In some US states, for example, I believe California allows you to have up to 4 tiers, so 4 depth plots. And that falls in the avenue of mausoleums where you can have family mausoleums and family crypts where you can inter 5 or 10 or more family members in that space.
Okay, so now are you saying that they need to let you know up front that they want to bury more than one person in that grave? Or can that be
correct?
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yes, so you would have, you build that relationship with the cemetery director and say, I wish to have a double depth. I intend on getting married, and the family heritage, my parents were buried together, my grandparents were buried together as well. Or if you wish to have side by side.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. Now listen, I'm going to turn this over to Andrea at this time. Andrea?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. All right, so we're going to keep on going here. There's so many questions. We're here to learn a lot. So Angela, we're back to you. The question is, my dad has had dementia for the past 5 years, and my sister had him to sign a will before he died in March of 2021 at the age of 92. The will left everything to her. What can we do?
Okay, we have to do some investigations because we have to figure out if dad, just because he has dementia doesn't mean that he necessarily can't sign a will. So one of the criteria to sign a will is to make sure that someone is of sound mind and that they understand what they're signing, and the contents of the will is something that they agreed to, and they weren't coerced into it. They weren't unduly influenced into the content of the will. And so when you have dementia, you can still have enough understanding to sign a will, but it becomes very suspect. So it is actually a legal test to determine if someone has a sound mind, but we always bolster it with a medical opinion. So in this particular case, we would look back and see what the lawyer that drew up the will, whether or not they had done their due diligence. Had they asked the questions to establish that dad had a sound mind when he signed this will? Was there a doctor's note that said, yes, dad had enough understanding to sign a will? And so, of course, if everything ticks off in the check boxes and it looks like dad signed it, he did it willingly and he did it knowingly, that's one matter. But if it turns out that dad didn't have an understanding and this document was basically stuck under his nose and he was given a pen and asked to sign and dad went ahead and signed, then the will is now suspect. And it's up to the people who are challenging the will to actually bring a court action to explain why they think the will isn't valid. So if you don't have soundness of mind, that will can be struck down as invalid. And if there is no will, that means dad died intestate. So you have to look at everyone's motivations. I mean, does it mean that, did dad actually favor that one child and had their whole life and that one child that got everything, assuming that that's what this person did with dad, is just to make sure that the will went all to one child? The question is whether or not there's something to gain from the ones who were left out. If they were to get that will struck down, then the laws of the province would generally say that the siblings all take equally if there is no surviving spouse. So that means you end up getting something from the estate when you originally weren't intended to get anything. So, there's a lot of questions and you'd have to ask a lot more of the details. But generally speaking, if someone's got dementia, you have to do some more due diligence.
And as we're talking about sound mind, what are the legal documents that are needed if one loses mental capacity by an accident or sickness back to dementia or like Alzheimer's or something?
Sure. So there's 2 documents in Alberta. They're called different things in different provinces and different states, but they all have a general same content or premise. One of the documents that we have in Alberta is called the Enduring Power of Attorney. And that document allows you, when you are of sound mind, to have chosen someone that you trust to make financial decisions. And then the second document is called the Personal Directive. And that is also a document that you create and sign when you're of sound mind, and you choose a loved one and a trusted person to make medical and healthcare and personal decisions for you. Now, I guess with the way that the question is phrased, I'm going to be a typical lawyer and say, you know what, I don't have enough information. But if if your loved one has dementia and doesn't have sound mind, then it's too late to sign those documents, because that parent had to have understood the document in order to sign it. So now we're entering into court application territory. And so a loved one has to bring a court application to be appointed as the trustee. The trustee makes financial decisions, and then you have to appoint a guardian. A guardian makes health care and personal care decisions. And there's a pecking order or a priority list. So, for instance, a spouse would be first, and if not spouse, then children. And so the government in their legislation determines who's got priority to bring that court application. And it might not be if dad was of sound mind, maybe he wouldn't have chosen his son, who was not good with finances and in fact is a little loose with money. So these are the things that you have to think about in pre-planning so that you have the choice rather than having the government dictate.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much. And of course, I want to say a story, but I won't do that right now. But Angela, if you can please let us know if we do not get these documents in place before someone loses mental capacity, what's the difference in dollars that families will be responsible for?
Well, it's the difference. It's like buying insurance for your house, like fire insurance, and you pay the premiums, and it's ultimately going to be a lot affordable. But can you imagine if you didn't have insurance and your house burned down? How much is it going to cost you to actually rebuild your house? It's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's not the same cost perspective, but the same analogy applies, because if you do everything preemptively or you plan it when you don't need it, those documents are actually relatively inexpensive. Whereas if you now don't have the soundness of mind to actually sign these documents and a court becomes involved, now you're getting the government involved, And court applications require, there's a cost to bring the application, a cost that you pay to the court. And then also many times you have to hire a lawyer because you have to navigate those court processes. And so you have to hire a lawyer, and there's lawyer fees involved as well. So ultimately it's probably going to be, I'm going to say at least 10 times the cost of getting a document done when you're able to versus having the court to get involved. It's probably at least 10 times larger.
Wow. Once again, pre-planning, pre-planning, and pre-planning. Thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to another funeral director who's joined us, Michael. He's from here in Calgary. Michael, the question came across, this section that you have is all on COVID. My family is concerned about catching COVID-19 from the deceased. Should this be a concern?
Thank you, Andrea. Great question. The short answer is yes. I think everybody should be concerned about COVID. We don't know very much about it, and people are learning about all kinds of things to do with COVID. What I can tell you, though, is there have been no documented cases of people catching COVID from a deceased human being. And as you consider what we do know about COVID, we know that it's typically transmitted through the air. And so deceased people are obviously not breathing, but that doesn't mean when we move them around, we don't get particles from the deceased. So there's low risk. I know that most funeral homes are taking measures to, once they encounter someone that has passed away, they'll put disinfectant into their cavities and wrap them up, put a mask around the deceased, and then bathe the body. And embalming would actually ensure that any microorganisms have been rendered inert or are killed. So there's not going to be any chance at all of COVID or any of the other diseases that we come in contact with being caught by the public.
Thank you. Hopefully you could answer this, because this is more of an American question, but there were so many people cremated during COVID. Obviously, we're still in COVID. Why was that? And if the family would have pre-arranged in advance, would that have made a difference in regards to what funeral home they probably would have been able to go with?
You've tackled a number of things in your question. First of all, has COVID increased the numbers of people being cremated? And the short answer is yes. There are still people, and the margin is slightly larger. It's not significantly larger, and it depends where you are. In places like Mississippi, where the burial rate is very, very low, you know, that perhaps the cremation rate all of a sudden was quite a bit larger than it normally would have been. In Calgary, where the cremation rate is already in the high 70s, it perhaps went a little bit more, just because I think people were mostly concerned that they couldn't have any type of a gathering. And so they were just thinking, I can't do anything, so we'll just have the body cremated. People who wanted burial were oftentimes just, well, it's not the right time to have a gathering, so we'll just have a burial. So we didn't notice our cremation rates. They did go up, but they didn't go up in exorbitant amounts. They went up a little bit.
Right.
And really, those decisions, you know, as to why people are making the decisions about choosing cremation versus burial, those are decisions that have had to be made over many, many years, and they're talked about regularly. And I think that a lot of it has had to do with, well, what are my options now with the restrictions in terms of gatherings and with what we can do as a family in terms of even viewing and things like that. And so, and of course, there's a perception and some reality that cremation can be a little bit less expensive. So people will oftentimes make that choice.
Right, right. So here in Calgary, what are the COVID restrictions currently? Because they've changed recently, right?
Yes, and they continue to change. So, you know, there was one particular week where the province changed them and then the city changed them. And then, you know, it depends if you're at a church or if you're in a building or if you're outside, if you're in a funeral home or so forth. Depends if there's, so currently the restriction is 50 people. because of that, we've actually this fall had a number of funerals that were actually outside so that we could have larger numbers. And we have found, since we've been live streaming, just like this is being live streamed, because we've been able to live stream funerals, that quite often families are having the small services, and the friends are able to, from all over the world, you know, they don't have to travel, but they can still gather and still grieve and mourn and participate. Perhaps it's not the way they would prefer, but they can still grieve and mourn, even though there are COVID restrictions in place.
Right. Wow. Thank you so much. Moving on to Glenn. I have life insurance on my job. Do I need coverage outside of my job?
Short answer, yes. It's about control. Whether you leave that job or you're asked to leave, the insurance kind of stays behind. So you want something that you have control over. So yes, it's better to just get your own.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we're going to pause for a poll. So let's see. Who here has a will? So we're going to actually put a poll up on the screen here, and don't worry, we cannot see who has and who does not. We're just going to see the percentage. So we're just waiting to see the poll come up. There we go. So the question here is, do you have a will? For those who are in the audience. Sorry, panelists, you can't vote. All right, let's see what the results are. Okay, oh, this is interesting. So as we can see here, 63% do have a will, which is actually really good, and 38% does not. So the stat has it that 50 to 60% of Canadians do not have a will. So this group has actually surpassed that. So congratulations, that's awesome. All right, so we're going to move on to our next impact story. So we're going to have Trevor Lewis join us. So Trevor, thank you so much for joining. I'm not seeing you, but hopefully, let's see here. All right. Thank you. Trevor is one of our seniors, and we thank him so much for taking the time to joining us. Hello, Trevor. If you could just move your chair a little bit further, close to the front if possible.
Oh, yeah.
Or move the screen. There we go. How you doing, Trevor?
I'm good so far, you know.
Good, good. Good to see you. All right. So, you know, I'm going to give us another stats here. So they say that 2 to 3% of Canadians do not have their funeral pre-arrangements set up. And you and Grandma are one of the 1/3. So congratulations on that. So let's think back to when Grandma passed away. In fact, how old was Grandma when she passed away?
101 and 2 weeks.
101 and 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And she ended up doing her pre-planning started about 30 years ago?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Now tell me something. I know that Grandma did her pre-arrangements starting from 30 years ago, and Grandma also assigned an amazing company or family friend to help you through this process.
Yes.
When Grandma did pass away, was it stressful? How was that, knowing that she did all of her pre-planning in advance?
It wasn't stressful at all.
Was not stressful at all.
To have everything set up on papers already. And Sister Taka was the one that asked to do everything for her, you know.
Right, right.
It was nice. That's why I tried to go ahead with mine as well, you know.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, and that is such a gift that, you know, Trevor had, because his mother did it all. When in fact we were helping with a funeral with Pearson's the Sunday, got the notification that Grandma was down, and Grandma passed away the Tuesday. And when I tell you that it was so smooth, it was so smooth to the fact, you guys, that Grandma had in her wishes and memories book what her favorite hymn was, what her scripture reading was. Grandma even had, in fact, the words that is on her headstones is words that we got in her wishes and memories. Oh, yeah. So as you can imagine, that saved a lot for Trevor.
That's true. That's true.
Yes. Is there anything that you want to leave with us? Any advice that you want to leave with us when it comes to pre-planning, getting things done in advance?
The only thing I want to say, I'm glad I'm with Pearson, and I know I'll be well taken care of when I pass,
Yes.
From you guys there, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Trevor.
Thank you
All
very much.
right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to move on to Angela. Hey, Angela. My
Hi.
mother passed away without a will, and she has 5 children who really, why do I feel like I'm doing a lot of questions? Sorry, hold on, guys, because I feel like I'm doing a lot here, but it is me again. Oh my gosh. Okay. My mother passed away without a will, and she has 5 children who really don't get along. How will the court determine which one of us will become the executor of her estate?
That's a really good question. So because she doesn't have a will, that means she doesn't have an executor. And so the provincial laws will actually dictate who gets to be the executor. So if mom was not survived by a spouse, then the children are next to be the executor. So all 5 have equal rights. Actually, the terminology in Alberta is personal representative rather than executor, but it's interchangeable. And if you don't have a will, it's administrator or personal representative. Anyway, all 5 kids have the right to apply. And so if they don't get along, what if, 3 of them get along great, the other 2 don't get along? That means it's like having a 3-legged race. In this case, it's a 5-legged race, right? Or 5 people tied together. And they have to sign all of the official documentation. They have to do the job jointly. And if they don't get along, that job is going to take much longer because they can't agree on anything. They can't agree on perhaps the funeral. They can't agree on whether or not to sell the house. They can't agree on whether or not who gets mom's china. And so you can see every step is just going to take so much longer because everything has to be a fight. So if mom knew that and knew the dynamics of her family, having a will would mean, you know what, I'm going to appoint these 3. They make good decisions. Maybe I won't appoint the other 2, but when you don't have a will, all 5 are acting as executors. And if people want off, then they have to sign a piece of documentation called a renunciation, which says, I know I have the right to be the personal representative, but I don't want to do it. And so if you can't get them to renounce, they're on. So you're stuck acting with your brothers and sisters.
Wow. I don't know, guys. That just sounds like a hot mess to me. Wow. Okay. Manel, we're going back to you here. How long will it take for me to receive a death certificate?
Mm-hmm. All right, so there's 2 things here. First of all, from the funeral home, what we give you in Ontario is called a proof of death certificate. So that's a form created at the funeral home. It does not include a medical cause of death. It is something that you can use for insurance companies, banks, things of that nature to help close an estate. So for us, if you let us know, hey, I need this for insurance, we'll get that ready for you ASAP so you can at least take one and get that going. Now, if you're looking for a medical certificate of death, now that you have to apply to the government for, and then I believe it's a couple of weeks that you're going to wait to receive that official documentation. And in that case, you'll get an actual copy of the medical certificate listing the cause of death and doctor's information and all of that. So it depends on which one.
Yeah,
Right, thank you.
If there's toxicology, it will be months before you get an actual thing.
Sorry, yes, I'm speaking just for simple cases. Yeah. You're very right, absolutely.
Wow, okay. All right, so my brother died and I was confused that he was not embalmed. Under what circumstances would a body not be embalmed?
Yeah, so in most cases, if you're looking at having an open casket for public viewing, it is strongly suggested that you are embalming just because you don't know the state or how someone might be. If I'm surprised in this case that it was your brother and you weren't aware, because this is the kind of things that you'd want to discuss as a family so that when you come to the viewing, you're aware of what will be happening. In that case, let's say that you're, for whatever reason, you've chosen not to be embalmed, you're just going to have a family identification or a family quick viewing, where we're just going to say, okay, this is my brother, and then we'll go from there. In that case, perhaps you're not going to be embalmed, and it's just immediate family, so the people who will be viewing is a smaller number. So the
Right.
hope would be that you'd be informed before that happened. But if you're ever looking for a public viewing, for the most part, you will be embalmed so that when friends arrive, they're seeing what they're expecting to see. And also, like Michael mentioned it before, like the chance of reducing any cause, anything that could be spread, right? Meaning we're trying to reduce that with the disinfection done by embalming as well. Okay?
Right. Thank you. I'm trying to train myself. Andrea, no comments. Keep on going. Okay.
Sorry.
We're pushing on. This is great.
Andrea,
So,
can I ask a
Glenn.
quick question right here? Can I
Yes,
ask
go
a
ahead,
quick
Rhonda.
question
Go
right
ahead.
here? Now, here in the States, and I know everything is different, say for instance, if the person is Muslim, their practice is not to embalm. And I'm just curious to know, does religion play a factor in Canada for a person not being embalmed?
Yes, yes, it does. And I guess it's for me with all, this is Manila again, it leads back to expectation. So if those that are arriving are expecting to see an unembalmed body, then that is, it's again, it's a strong suggestion, but it's not enforced, right? It's only specific cases. If a person, in Ontario at least, if a person passes from XXX, then you must be embalmed if there's going to be any viewing or anything like that. But that's only specific cases. But still just a strong suggestion, and friends and family are welcome to see whatever they're accustomed to seeing.
Great.
Michael,
Thank you, Rhonda. Good question. Glenn, what happens to my insurance money if all of my beneficiaries predeceased before me?
Good question. Okay. So hopefully you have a will, Angela. So correct. Hopefully you have a will, because that then runs into typically estate, right? If you've got beneficiaries and they all predeceased, generally what happens, let's say you have 3 people on there. One passes away, then the other 2 get the equal share.
Okay.
Right? So that could get tricky. That could say, okay, maybe whoever was on there last who died had a will for their thing and says it goes to these people. So it can get really tricky. I generally get contingents as well, but those are some of those odd cases that are difficult to plan for.
Right, right. And who has a right to make changes to an insurance policy?
The owner.
Right, of the policy?
The owner, and if it's rare that we do this, there's what's called an irrevocable beneficiary. Very rarely done. In cases where there's separation and there's young children, or like divorces, stuff like that, they may want to have one person make sure the policy stays in force. So you can't change even your banking. You can't cancel the policy without the irrevocable beneficiary signing off on that as well, right? So in that case, then you need both. But whether it's a single owner or if it's joint ownership, then you need both. Whoever's owners, you need them to sign off on any changes.
Right, great, thank you. My wife is dying and her kids told me that she wanted to, nope, sorry, this is not a question for you. Ran, it's your turn. Sorry, Ran. My wife is dying and her kids told me that she wanted to be buried with her first husband, but I want to bury her with me when I go. Who has the final say for that?
So it's important to have a will in place and an updated will, and this would take care and control of that, because immediately once the person has died, the will can be read and that person's wishes can be made out in funeral pre-planning and due diligence that we would do to ensure that that person's wishes are written out and signed. Although they are not legal, it does have some bearing. If it were to go to court where the person did sign the document, it was dated, although the will would be first and foremost to grant the person's wishes.
Right, and what I'll do is, do any of the funeral directors want to piggyback on that one?
Can I jump in, Andrea? It's Angela.
Yes, please do.
Well, in Alberta specifically, the executor has the right. So even if the will expresses a different wish in terms of funeral and the disposition of the remains, the executor can actually override what's in the will. So anything you put in a will is actually just an expression of a wish. If the executor wants to I don't know, just do something completely different, the executor's got the right to do so.
This is why it's so important for us to all have a will, and it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back. Rhonda, I pass the baton to you. Thank you so much.
Wow, things are really different from country to country. Angela, I just want to ask you real quick. So the spouse has no say-so if there's no will?
If you're right, if there's no will, then there's no executor named. And so when you look at the legislation, top of the priority list says the executor. So then it would fall to spouse. So if there was no will, then the spouse would have a say because there is no executor to override them.
Wow.
Could I jump in for
Right.
just
Well,
a moment?
I have you front and center. That just blew me away. Let me ask you another.
Sorry, Rhonda.
Okay.
And also, Michael, what I knew this was going to cause different conversations here. Michael also had something that he wanted to add to that one as well.
Sure.
So, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Sure, it's everything you've all said is correct. But when you're actually on the ground meeting with families and you have someone who's married, but they're separated and now there's a common law and there's a will and somebody else is the executor and some of these people care and some of them don't, then you really have to work out the details and you end up with a mishmash of things. And as funeral directors, we are not lawyers. And also, sometimes even lawyers can't sort these out and it has to go to a judge because really, ultimately, if there is conflict, then we're not the ones that really are to determine who really truly is in charge and what should be done. So in difficult circumstances, and they happen occasionally as funeral directors, and I'm sure Manel, you would say this, our biggest goal is to, yes, determine who legally has responsibility. And sometimes we can't tell, but if we can tell, the biggest thing is to get everybody on the same page and walk through it, because we don't have much time when someone dies. We can't just wait weeks and months for a will to get probated and for somebody else to come up with it. So as funeral directors, we really have to manage that. And pre-planning actually kind of lets us know what really should happen and what the deceased wishes are. And it's a really wonderful document to help us guide the family through their choices and their difficult choices at that time.
Wow. Okay, moving right back to Angela. So Angela, this writer says, we have a blended family. And my stepmother is the beneficiary of my dad's life insurance. But my dad opened a bank account and made me the beneficiary of that bank account. Can my stepmother take that money from me?
There's a few ways to answer that. Here in Canada, on a regular bank account, you actually can't name a beneficiary. There's certain types of investments, for instance, registered retirement funds, which are similar to your 401ks, and tax-free savings accounts. Those allow for a beneficiary designation. And so can the stepmother take it? Yes. In Alberta, we have a piece of legislation it used to be called the Matrimonial Property Act. It has now been changed to be called the Family Property Act. So it includes common law spouses as well. And what it says is, if you were to split up in a divorce style or separate, you would be entitled to half of the assets. So why is it that you're married and you die and if you don't give your assets to your spouse, it's almost like you're giving away half of your spouse's assets that were not even yours to give away. So we have a piece of legislation called the Family Property Act in which the stepmother can say, whoa, hold up, half those assets were mine before you go and give them away. So the judge would have to sort out whether or not part of that is part of a marital claim before it can be paid out.
Okay, like I said, things are different Wherever you go, they're always different.
Yeah.
One of the things I did want to piggyback on that is, what if the father had his daughter's name on the bank account? Would that make a difference?
Well, and this is where Canadian law is different again. There's a court case where it now basically says where you make things joint, like a bank account, where you throw your kids on the title of your property. If there was no value received, so in other words, you threw your daughter onto your title, she didn't pay for half that title, or you threw your daughter onto the bank account as owner, the law says that now, no, we're going to treat it as if it's part of the estate, and it's not supposed to go to the daughter when dad dies. You have to overcome that presumption. I don't think that law is the same elsewhere, but in Alberta, that is the law, is that if there's what we call a gratuitous gift, where it's intergenerational, the kid didn't add any value, dad or mom just put you on to help with the administering of that asset when they passed on, then we're not going to treat it as if it's yours. When you're the surviving kid, it's not yours. It's going to be treated as if it's part of the estate, unless you can show dad had a different or mom had a different intention.
Okay. All right. Well, that is a major difference. But this is why it's so important to have these conversations, because, I have a relative that lived in the States, moved to Germany, and is now thinking about moving to Canada. And I was hoping that he would jump on here, because this is something he needs to know, because he has property and he has it in his name and his daughter's name. And so if he does that in Canada, he's going to have an issue. So,
yes,
all right, moving right along. This is for Michael. Michael, what do you do in a case where the funeral home has picked up a loved one, and and you have this person, their loved one, in your care, and then it's determined that the family don't have any insurance, they don't have any money, you got the body? What do you do then? How do you get paid?